A father swallows his newborn children whole. One by one, he devours them alive, not killing them, but imprisoning them in eternal darkness within his own body. For years they exist there, conscious, aware, trapped in a living tomb. This is not horror fiction. This is Greek mythology's foundation story. And the father is Cronus, king of the Titans, ruler during humanity's golden age, the god who presided over paradise itself. Yet beneath that paradise lay a secret so horrifying that when it was finally revealed, it sparked a war that would last 10 years and reshape the cosmos itself. Before Zeus, before Athena, before every god and hero whose name you recognize, there ruled beings of such primordial power that even their overthrow required divine weapons, forged specifically to kill the unkillable, allies pulled from the deepest pits of creation, and a conflict so violent it could be heard in the lowest depths of the underworld. They were called the Titans, the first divine rulers of the cosmos, the gods before the gods, the age before the age we know. Their story is one of creation and castration, of paradise built on blood, of prophecies that cannot be escaped no matter how desperately one tries, and of the terrible things fear makes even gods willing to do. The story of the Titans is not merely the prologue to the more familiar tales of Zeus and the Olympian gods. It is the foundation upon which all Greek mythology stands, a narrative of creation and destruction, of parents and children locked in cycles of violence and betrayal, of prophecies that cannot be avoided no matter how desperately one tries. It is a story about the nature of power itself, how it is seized, how it corrupts, and how it inevitably passes from one generation to the next, no matter the cost. The Titans ruled during what ancient Greeks called the Golden Age, a time of peace and abundance that humanity has longed to recapture ever since. Yet this paradise was built on blood and maintained through fear, presided over by a king who lived in terror of his own offspring. Tonight, as you settle into comfort and let the day's tensions drain away, we will journey back to the very beginning of divine history. We will witness the violent birth of the Titans from the union of earth and sky. Watch as the youngest among them commits an act of such brutal defiance that it sunders heaven from earth forever, and walk through the strange paradise of their golden age. We will meet each of the 12 Titans individually, learning their domains and their destinies. We will watch as prophecy and paranoia transform a cosmic ruler into a father who swallows his own children whole. And we will see how those children, once freed, wage war against their elders in a conflict that shook the very foundations of existence. This is the story of the gods before the gods, the rulers who came before the rulers, the age before the age we know. This is the age of the Titans, when the world was young and terrible and beautiful and strange. Let the familiar world fade away. Let your breathing slow and deepen. And let us travel back before history, before memory, to the time when Titans walked the earth and the cosmos was still being born. From chaos to creation, the birth of the Titans. In the beginning, there was chaos. Not chaos as we understand it today, not disorder or confusion or pandemonium, but chaos as the ancient Greeks conceived it. A vast, yawning void, a cosmic emptiness, a primordial nothingness that somehow contain the potential for everything. Picture a darkness so complete that darkness itself has no meaning, a silence so profound that sound has not yet been invented, a stillness so absolute that even stillness has not learned to be still. This was chaos, the first of all things, the original state of non-being from which all being would eventually emerge. But from this emptiness, spontaneously and mysteriously, the first beings came into existence. We cannot say they were born, for there was nothing yet to give birth to them. We cannot say they were created, for there was no creator. They simply began to be, as if the universe itself willed them into existence, as if reality could no longer bear to be empty. The poet Hesiod, writing around 700 BCE, in his great work The Theogony, tells us that from chaos came Gaia, the earth, solid and broad and eternal, the foundation upon which all else would rest. From chaos also came Tartarus, the deep and gloomy pit far beneath the earth, a place of darkness and punishment that would one day hold even gods. And from chaos came Eros, the force of love and desire, the cosmic principle of attraction, without which nothing would unite, nothing would reproduce, nothing would create. But it was Gaia who matters most to our story, for Gaia was fertile and powerful and alone, and from her own substance, without partner or mate, she brought forth children. First, she created Uranus, the starry sky, making him equal to herself, so that he might cover her completely, so that he might be a secure dwelling place for the blessed gods who were yet to come. She also brought forth the mountains, the high peaks that would later serve as thrones for divinities, and Pontus, the barren sea, its waters churning and restless, even in those early days of creation. Then Gaia lay with Uranus, her own son, and their union was the first true mating of the cosmos, sky embracing earth. And from this primordial coupling came the first generation of gods, the Titans. They were 12 in number, 6 male and 6 female, and Hesiod gives us their names with careful attention, for names held power in the ancient world, and to know the name of a god was to know something of their nature and their domain. The males were Oceanus, whose name evokes the deep swirling waters that would become his realm. Coeus, associated with the axis of heaven, around which the stars revolved. Creus, linked to the constellations, in the measure of the year. Hyperion, whose very name means he who goes above. The Titan of light, from whom the sun, moon, and dawn would spring. Iapetus, connected to mortality and the mortal lifespan, father of the most famous Titan children. And youngest of all, Cronus, whose name the ancients sometimes connected to the word for time itself. Though modern scholars debate this etymology, Cronus, the youngest, would become the most powerful, the most feared, and eventually the most tragic of all the Titans. The females were Thea, the divine Titaness whose name means goddess or divine light, associated with sight and the shining ether of the bright blue sky. Rhea, whose name may derive from words meaning flow or ease, destined to become the great mother of the Olympian gods. Themis, personification of divine law and order, the natural law that even gods must follow. Mnemosyne, whose very name means memory, mother of the 9 muses who would inspire all art and learning. Phoebe, the bright or radiant one, associated with the moon and prophetic wisdom. And Tethys, partner to Oceanus, connected to the nourishing aspects of water, the freshwater sources that make life possible. These were the Titans, the first gods, born when the world was new. They were not the small human-shaped deities that later Greek art would depict. They were primordial, vast, embodying fundamental forces of nature and cosmos. When they moved, mountains trembled. When they spoke, the heavens listened. They were the children of earth and sky, and in their bodies flowed the raw power of creation itself. But Uranus and Gaia did not stop with the Titans. Gaia gave birth to 3 more sets of children, and these were strange and terrible in ways that even the mighty Titans were not. First came the Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, beings of immense size and strength, each possessing only a single eye set in the middle of their foreheads. Their names meant thunder, lightning, and bright, and in ages to come they would forge the most powerful weapons the gods would ever wield. Then came the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, 3 brothers named Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, each possessed of 50 heads and 100 arms of enormous strength. They were beings of such power and such strangeness that even their divine parents could barely comprehend them. And it was these children, these strange and mighty beings, that proved to be the breaking point. Uranus looked upon the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires and was filled with loathing. Whether he feared their power, was disgusted by their appearance, or simply could not bear to have such alien creatures in his cosmos, we cannot say. But his solution was brutal and unnatural. He took these children of his body, these offspring of his union with Gaia, and he thrust them back into the earth, back into Gaia's womb, hiding them away in the darkness of her depths, where they would see no light, no freedom, exist in perpetual imprisonment. Some traditions say he also imprisoned the Cyclopes there, these mighty craftsmen who had done no wrong. All accounts agree that Uranus rejoiced in this cruel deed, taking pleasure in the absence of these troublesome children, never considering the cost of his action. For Gaia, the great earth herself, could feel her children trapped within her, could sense their suffering and their rage. The pressure of their imprisonment caused her agony, but more than physical pain, she felt the moral outrage of a mother whose children have been unjustly punished, hidden away not for any crime, but simply for existing in a way their father found displeasing. And so in her deep places, in the caverns beneath mountains, and the hollows below the seas, Gaia began to plot revenge. The sky had forgotten that the earth was not passive, not merely a stage upon which dramas played out. The earth was alive, conscious, and angry. And when the earth grows angry, even the sky itself should tremble. The stage was set for the first great act of violence in the divine cosmos, the first overthrow, the first time that children would rise against their parents and seize power through blood and horror. The age of Uranus was coming to an end, though the sky did not yet know it. The age of the Titans was about to begin. Born in an act so violent, so primal, that it would echo through all the myths that followed, establishing a pattern that would repeat like a curse through generation after generation of gods. In the darkness of Earth's depths, a sickle was being forged, and when it struck, the cosmos itself would never be the same. The castration of Uranus, a cosmic rebellion. Gaia could bear it no longer. Her children, the Hecatoncères and the Cyclopes, remained imprisoned within her body, their suffering her suffering, their rage her rage. And Uranus, oblivious or uncaring, continued to descend upon her night after night, continuing their cosmic mating, never acknowledging the pain he had caused, never questioning whether he had the right to dispose of his own children, as if they were merely inconvenient objects, rather than living beings with their own claim to existence. In the deep places of the earth, Gaia fashioned a weapon. She reached into her own substance, into the hardest, most unyielding material in all creation, and from it she forged a sickle. Not a sickle of bronze or iron, for those metals were not yet known. This was a sickle of adamant, a word the ancient Greeks used to describe something utterly unbreakable, something harder than diamond, a substance that existed in myth, but not in nature because nature could not contain anything so absolute. The blade was gray as flint and sharp enough to cut through anything. Flesh, bone, even the body of a god. With this terrible weapon in her possession, Gaia called her Titan children to her, these 12 gods who were mighty but not yet rulers, powerful but not yet tested. She explained her suffering, described the injustice of their imprisoned siblings, and asked which among them would take up the sickle and punish their father for his cruelty. This was not a small request. This was asking one of her children to commit violence against their own father, to raise a weapon against the god who had sired them, to fundamentally tear apart the natural order of parent and child for the sake of justice and vengeance. The Titans were silent. Even gods can know fear. And Uranus was vast and terrible, the overarching sky itself, eternal and inescapable. To attack him would be to attack the cosmos itself, to set oneself against nature and order and everything that was. One by one, the Titans refused or remained silent, unwilling to take up the terrible burden that Gaia offered. All except one. Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, stepped forward. The ancient sources don't tell us his precise motivations, leaving us to interpret from his actions. He might have been bolder than his brothers because he was youngest and had less to lose. He could have been more ambitious, hungrier for power, willing to do what others would not in order to seize supremacy. It's possible he alone truly understood the depths of Gaia's suffering and felt compelled by something like justice or compassion. Or, and this is the interpretation that casts the darkest shadow on what follows, he may simply have enjoyed the prospect of violence, of overturning the old order, of proving himself through a deed so shocking that his name would be spoken with awe and terror forever after. Whatever his motivation, Cronus took the sickle from his mother's hand and agreed to her plan. Some traditions say that all the Titans except Oceanus participated, positioned at the four corners of the earth to hold Uranus fast when he descended. But Hesiod emphasizes Cronus's central role, and it is Cronus who wields the blade. Cronus who commits the actual act. Cronus who will forever after be known as the castrator of heaven, the god who wounded the sky. Gaia hid Cronus in a place of ambush, concealing him in some hollow, or crevice of the earth, and they waited. And when evening came, as it had come since the beginning of time, Uranus descended to lie with Gaia, spreading himself over her entirely, covering the earth completely, bringing the darkness of night. This was the natural rhythm of the cosmos, sky embracing earth, heaven descending to its partner. There was no reason for Uranus to suspect anything was different, no warning that this night would be unlike all the others that had come before. And then Cronus struck. Reaching out from his hiding place, the youngest Titan grasped his father's genitals with his left hand, the sinister hand, the hand of curses and ill omens, and with his right hand, he swung the adamantine sickle. The blade, gray and merciless, cut through divine flesh as easily as a scythe through wheat. Uranus's genitals were severed in one terrible stroke, and Cronus, completing the act without hesitation or mercy, threw them behind him, casting them away into the darkness. What followed was chaos of a kind the young cosmos had never known. Blood spurted from the wound, divine ichor falling upon Gaia. And from this blood, even in the moment of Uranus's pain and defeat, new beings were born. Where the blood splattered upon the earth, the giants sprang into existence, beings of enormous size and terrible strength. The Erinyes were born as well, the Furies, three dread goddesses of vengeance, Alecto, Megara, and Tisiphone, whose purpose was to hunt down and punish those who committed crimes against the natural order, particularly crimes against parents and against sacred oaths. Their birth from this particular act of violence was bitterly appropriate. They were born from the punishment of a father who had wronged his children, and they would spend eternity punishing children who wronged their parents. Also born from the blood were the Meliae, nymphs of the ash tree, associated with the wood from which spears were made. Another reminder of the violence that marked their origin. But the severed genitals themselves, thrown by Cronus into the darkness, did not fall upon land. They arced through the air and splashed into the sea, the great waters that surrounded the world. And there they floated, and from them rose a white foam, spreading across the surface of the waves. The foam grew and gathered and took shape, and from it stepped forth one of the most powerful and important goddesses of the Greek pantheon, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, born not from any gentle or tender origin, but from the violence of castration, from the severed sexuality of the sky god, from blood and sea foam, and the weapons stroke that ended the first age of divine rule. Aphrodite's birth from such violence has never ceased to fascinate scholars and storytellers. The goddess of love and desire, of the softest and most tender human experiences, emerged from an act of brutal emasculation. She embodied the creative and generative power that Uranus had misused, the fertility and attraction that makes all life possible. But her origin reminded all who knew the myth that love and violence, creation and destruction, tenderness and cruelty were more intimately connected than anyone might wish to believe. As for Uranus himself, the myth is less clear about what happened to him after this mutilation. In some traditions, he simply withdrew, pulling back into the upper atmosphere, and from that day forward, the sky no longer descended to embrace the earth with the same intimacy. The separation of heaven and earth that Cronus's sickle created was permanent, a wound in the cosmos itself. Uranus receded into the background of myth, no longer an active participant in divine affairs, appearing only rarely in later stories to offer warnings or prophecies, a diminished figure who had once been the ruler of all, but was now merely one element among many. But before he withdrew entirely, Uranus managed to speak a curse. Looking down at his children, at the Titans who now stood triumphant over him, at Cronus in particular who held the bloody sickle, Uranus gave them a new name. He called them Titanes, the strainers, saying that they had strained against their natural bonds, that they had dared to commit a fearful deed, reaching beyond what was proper, overstepping the boundaries of what children should do to parents. And he promised that vengeance would come afterward, that they would pay for what they had done, that the pattern they had established would repeat against them, that those who overthrow their fathers should not be surprised when their own children learn the lesson well. It was prophecy and curse combined, a warning that the violence they had initiated would not end with them, that the precedent they set would haunt them. But in their moment of victory, newly freed from their father's tyranny, the Titans paid little attention to an old god's threats. They had won. They had seized power. They had proven that even the sky itself could bleed. Cronus released his imprisoned siblings from Gaia's depths. The Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires saw light for the first time since their birth. The Titans assumed control of the cosmos, dividing responsibilities among themselves, establishing the order that would govern the universe during their reign. And Cronus, the youngest, the one who had dared to strike the blow that others feared to attempt, took his place as king of the gods and ruler of the universe. The Golden Age was about to begin. But the shadow of Uranus's curse lay over it from the first moment, a warning that went unheeded, a prophecy that would prove utterly, terribly true. The Golden Age, paradise under Cronus. After the violence of his ascension, Cronus established something remarkable: peace. The new king of the gods, with blood still fresh on his hands from the castration of his father, became the presiding deity over what ancient Greek tradition would remember as the Golden Age of humanity. A time so perfect, so blessed, so abundant that every civilization since has looked back upon it with longing and lamentation, recognizing it as a paradise lost that can never be fully recovered. This was the first age of mortal humanity, according to Hesiod's scheme in Works and Days, though the creation and nature of these first humans varies in different tellings. What matters is not the precise details of their origin, but the conditions under which they lived. Conditions so ideal that they seem almost impossible to those of us who live in what the Greeks called the Age of Iron, an age of toil and sorrow and endless labor. During the Golden Age, humans lived like gods, not in the sense that they possessed divine powers or immortality, but in the sense that they were free from the burdens that define mortal existence as we know it. There was no need to work, no requirement to plow fields or plant crops or tend flocks, because the earth brought forth food in abundance without any human effort. Imagine trees perpetually heavy with fruit, fields of grain that required no sowing or harvesting, meadows where animals grazed peacefully, easily hunted without fear or flight. The earth itself was generous, Mother Gaia providing for her mortal children as naturally as breathing. There was no war during this age. no violence between humans, no theft or betrayal or cruelty. Men had no need to compete for resources since resources were unlimited. They had no cause to fear one another since there was nothing to take and nothing to defend. The very concepts of property, of ownership, of mine and yours had not yet been invented or were so loosely held as to cause no conflict. Justice was natural and instinctive rather than something that needed to be imposed by law or enforced by punishment. The seasons were mild and unchanging. Some traditions say it was perpetual spring, the world locked in that moment between winter's death and summer's heat, when everything is fresh and new and perfectly comfortable. Others say it was eternal autumn. The harvest season extended indefinitely, the year's fruit offered up forever without the preceding months of growth or the following months of decay. Either way, there were no harsh winters to survive, no scorching summers to endure, no violent storms or droughts or floods. The climate was as gentle as the social order, as abundant as the earth's fertility. Humans lived to extraordinary old age, some traditions saying they remained youthful in appearance and vigor, even as the centuries passed, aging gradually and imperceptibly, maintaining their strength and health until the very end. When death finally came, it arrived not as a terror or a tragedy, but as a gentle sleep, a peaceful release after a life fully and happily lived. There was no disease, no painful decline, no suffering in the final days. One simply lay down and did not wake up, passing from the world as naturally as falling asleep after a satisfying day. Even in death, the Golden Age humans were blessed. Their spirits did not descend to gloomy Hades or fade into nothingness. Instead, they remained on Earth as daimons, not demons in our modern sense, but benevolent spirits, guardians who watched over and protected the living, invisible guides who ensured that later generations would at least have some connection to that perfect time. They became the good spirits of the earth, dwelling in the fields and groves, blessing crops and protecting homes, intermediaries between the mortal world and the divine. This was the world under Cronus's rule. The Titan King presided over a cosmos in perfect balance, a paradise where mortal and immortal, earth and heaven, nature and civilization existed in complete harmony. It was everything humanity has longed for since. Every utopian vision, every dream of a better world has its roots in this mythological golden time. But there is a profound paradox at the heart of the Golden Age, a contradiction that ancient thinkers did not fail to notice. This perfect peace, this ideal society, this paradise on earth was established and maintained by Cronus, the same god who had castrated his own father, who had committed an act of shocking violence to gain power, who ruled not through natural right, but through violent overthrow. The most peaceful age in mythological history was presided over by a king who had proven himself capable of terrible brutality. Scholars have offered various interpretations of this paradox. Some suggest that the Golden Age represents a kind of cosmic guilt or compensation, arguing that Cronus created this paradise for humanity as a way of atoning for the violence of his ascension, of proving that the overthrow of Uranus had been necessary to establish a better order. Others see it as evidence of Cronus's genuinely beneficent nature, contending that the castration of Uranus was an act of justified rebellion against tyranny, and that Cronus's subsequent rule proved he was worthy of the power he had seized. But there is a darker interpretation as well, one that the evidence may support. Perhaps the Golden Age was not a sign of Cronus's virtue, but rather a historical accident, a brief moment when the cosmic order happened to align in a way that benefited humanity. A paradise that existed not because of Cronus's goodness, but despite his character. After all, as we shall see, when his own power was threatened, when his own children challenged him as he had challenged his father, Cronus would prove himself capable of horrors that made the castration of Uranus seem almost merciful by comparison. The Golden Age was also, according to some traditions, a time when gods and humans lived in closer proximity than they ever would again. The Titans walked among mortals, not distant and terrible, but present and accessible. Humans could speak with gods, could receive their wisdom and their blessings directly, could participate in the divine order rather than merely being subject to it from afar. This intimacy between mortal and immortal was part of what made the age golden, a closeness that would be lost in later ages when the Olympians would rule from high Olympus, distant and often indifferent to human concerns. Under Cronus's rule, the cosmos was stable. The sun rose and set in its appointed times, guided by Hyperion's children. The seas remained within their bounds, controlled by Oceanus and Tethys. The earth brought forth abundance under Gaia's continued fertility, blessed by Rhea and the other Titanesses. Justice was maintained by Themis, her natural law requiring no enforcement because all beings naturally acted in accordance with cosmic order. Memory was preserved by Mnemosyne, ensuring that nothing good or true would be forgotten. The axis of heaven turned smoothly in Coeus's care, the constellations marking time in their eternal dance. Creus measured the year. Iapetus reminded all beings of their mortality and the preciousness of time. And Phoebe provided prophetic wisdom to guide decisions before they were made. It was a perfectly ordered cosmos, each Titan fulfilling their role, each domain functioning smoothly, all things in balance. For mortals living within this system, life was quite literally paradise. An existence so blessed that no labor was required, no suffering was necessary, no death was feared. But perfection is fragile, and the very violence that established the Golden Age carried within it the seeds of the age's destruction. Uranus's curse still hung over Cronus, a prophecy that had not yet come to pass, but which the king of the Titans could not forget. As he sat upon his throne, ruling over paradise, overseeing peace and abundance, Cronus could not shake the memory of his father's final words, the promise that vengeance would come, that what he had done to his father would be done to him by his own children. And so, in the very heart of paradise, fear began to grow. The most peaceful age the world would ever know was about to be shattered, not by external threat or natural disaster, but by a father's paranoia, by the terror of a king who could not trust his own children, by the terrible things that fear makes even gods willing to do. The Golden Age was ending, though its human inhabitants did not yet know it. The serpent had entered paradise. But this serpent was neither external tempter nor demonic force. The serpent was fear itself, coiled in the heart of the god who ruled the world, waiting to strike at the very family that should have been Cronus's greatest comfort and joy. The prophecy and paranoia. Cronus devours his children. Cronus had seized power through violence, and though he had established peace and prosperity, he could not escape the precedent he himself had set. If a son could overthrow a father, if children could rise against their parents and claim the throne through blood, then what was to prevent his own children from doing to him exactly what he had done to Uranus? The question haunted him, and it was not merely paranoia, for he had the weight of actual prophecy to confirm his fears. Both Uranus and Gaia, his castrated father and his earth mother, warned Cronus that his fate would mirror his father's. The prophecy was specific and unavoidable. One of his own children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown Uranus. This was not a possibility or a potential danger. It was fate itself, woven into the cosmic order, as certain as the rising of the sun or the turning of the seasons. The gods of prophecy do not speak in maybes. When they give warning, they describe inevitability. Most beings, faced with such a prophecy, would despair or resign themselves to fate. But Cronus had proven himself willing to commit terrible acts to gain and maintain power. If the prophecy said one of his children would overthrow him, then his solution was brutally simple. He would ensure that his children never had the chance. He would not kill them outright. That might bring its own curse, the pollution of filicide, the stain of murdering one's own offspring. No, Cronus devised something more horrific, more unnatural, more psychologically cruel. He decided to swallow his children whole, to imprison them within his own body, as his father had imprisoned his siblings within the body of Gaia. It was a dark mirror of that earlier crime, a repetition with variation, proving that Cronus had learned both too much and too little from his father's mistakes. He had learned that imprisonment was not enough if those imprisoned could eventually be freed. But he had not learned that attempting to thwart fate through cruelty would only ensure that fate found another way to manifest. Cronus married his sister Rhea, and their union should have been a joyous thing. The king and queen of the cosmos, establishing a dynasty that would rule forever. Rhea was the Great Mother, embodiment of female fertility, the Titaness most closely associated with the nurturing and protective aspects of motherhood. She should have been honored as the mother of the next generation of gods, celebrated for bringing forth children who would continue the line of divine rule. Instead, she found herself trapped in a nightmare, watching each of her children, these perfect newborn gods, snatched away and destroyed almost before she could hold them. First came Hestia, the eldest. Ancient sources describe her as the goddess of the hearth, of the sacred fire that burns at the center of the home, the flame that represents domestic stability and communal warmth. But Rhea barely had time to see what her daughter might become before Cronus took the infant from her arms, opened his vast mouth, and swallowed her whole. The myths don't specify the exact conditions of this imprisonment, but they make clear she was not dead. She was trapped within her father's body, in darkness and isolation, existing in a living tomb from which there was no escape. Then came Demeter, the future goddess of agriculture and the harvest, of the fertility of the earth and the grain that sustains human life. She too was swallowed the moment of her birth. Before she could nurse, before she could smile, before she could do anything but cry out once, before being consumed by her own father. Hera arrived next, who would one day be the queen of the Olympian gods, goddess of marriage and sovereignty, protector of wives and the sacred bonds of matrimony. But she experienced no protection herself, knew no family bonds, except the terrible intimacy of being imprisoned within her father's body along with her sisters. The males came after, each suffering the same fate. Hades, the future lord of the underworld, the god who would preside over death itself, was swallowed before he could take a breath outside his father's body. Poseidon, the great sea god who would one day rival Zeus himself in power and majesty, who would shake the earth with his rage and rule all the oceans of the world, was consumed as easily as his siblings, reduced to prisoner and victim rather than allowed to become the mighty deity he was meant to be. 5 children born, 5 children swallowed. 5 times Rhea's joy turned to horror. 5 times she was forced to watch her husband commit an act so unnatural, so contrary to every instinct of parenthood and family, that it seemed to violate the very structure of the cosmos. The mother who should have protected her children was powerless. The father who should have guided and taught them had made himself their jailer and their tormentor. What must it have been like for Rhea? Every pregnancy brought hope. Perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps Cronus would relent. Perhaps love would overcome fear. And every birth brought the same crushing despair as Cronus, unmoved by his wife's pleading, by the innocence of the newborn, by any consideration except his own paranoid need to maintain power, repeated the terrible act. 5 times she had to endure not the death of her children, which might at least have brought some finality, but their continued existence in a state worse than death, living but imprisoned, aware but helpless, eternal infants trapped in eternal darkness. Rhea's grief and rage must have been immense, approaching the cosmic fury that Gaia herself had felt when Uranus imprisoned her children. And like Gaia, Rhea would not simply accept this injustice. When she became pregnant for a 6th time, when she felt the stirring of new life within her, she began to plan. This child, she vowed, would not suffer the fate of its siblings. This child would live. This child would grow. And perhaps, just perhaps, this child would fulfill the prophecy that Cronus feared so desperately, would become the overthrower of the overthrower, would break the cycle of violence by perpetuating it one more time. She sought counsel from her parents, from Uranus, who had suffered so much at Cronus's hands, and from Gaia, who understood a mother's need to protect her offspring. Together they devised a plan, a deception that would save the 6th child from Cronus's maw and set in motion the events that would eventually overthrow the Titan king and end the Golden Age forever. When the time came for the birth, Rhea went in secret to the island of Crete, to a cave on Mount Ida far from Cronus's watchful eye. There, hidden in the darkness of the earth itself, guarded by the natural fortifications of stone and secrecy, she gave birth to her youngest son. His name was Zeus, and he would indeed grow up to overthrow his father, to free his siblings, and to establish a new order of divine rule. But his birth was only the beginning of a much longer story, a tale of survival and growth, of allies gathered and weapons forged, of a final confrontation between father and son that would shake the cosmos to its foundations. For now, in the cave on Crete, Rhea held her newborn son and wept tears that were both joy and sorrow. Joy because he lived, because she had saved at least one of her children. Sorrow because 5 others remained imprisoned, because her husband had become a monster, because the only hope for justice and freedom required more violence, more betrayal, more children rising against parents in an endless cycle of overthrow and revenge. The Golden Age continued on the surface. Humans still lived in peace and abundance, still enjoyed their blessed existence, still knew nothing of war or want. But at the heights of divine power, in the throne room of the Titan King, the age was already over. The seeds of its destruction had been sown the moment Cronus swallowed his first child, the moment fear overcame love, the moment he chose power over family. Uranus's prophecy was already in motion. The one who would overthrow Cronus had been born. All that remained was for him to grow, to learn, to gather his strength, and to return to claim what fate had decreed was his, the throne of the cosmos, and vengeance for what had been done to him and his siblings. The age of the Titans was ending, though the Titans did not yet know it. The age of the Olympians was about to begin, born like the age before it in violence and blood, in family betrayal and cosmic overthrow. Some patterns, it seemed, were too deeply woven into the fabric of fate to ever truly change. The rise of Zeus, seeds of revolution. In the cave on Mount Ida, hidden in the belly of the island of Crete, the infant Zeus grew, protected by forces both natural and divine. Rhea, having delivered her son to safety, had to return to Cronus's side, had to maintain the deception that would keep Zeus alive. The plan she and her parents had devised required one more act, one final piece of trickery to satisfy Cronus's paranoia and buy Zeus the time he needed to grow strong. Rhea took a large stone, roughly the size and weight of a newborn god, and wrapped it in swaddling clothes, as if it were an infant. She returned to Cronus and presented him with this bundle, and the king of the Titans, so consumed with fear and so certain that every child must be swallowed, did not question or examine what she gave him. He simply opened his mouth and swallowed the stone whole, believing he had consumed his 6th child, just as he had consumed the previous 5. Some versions of the myth suggest that Gaia herself provided the stone, a rock called the omphalos that would later become a sacred object, marking the center of the world. Other traditions simply note that Cronus was deceived, and that his very paranoia, his inability to slow down and truly see what was before him, made the deception possible. With Cronus satisfied that the threat had been neutralized, Zeus remained hidden in Crete, growing in strength and wisdom far from his father's knowledge. Different traditions describe his childhood in different ways, but all agree that he was protected and nurtured by beings dedicated to keeping him safe until he was ready to fulfill his destiny. Some stories say that Zeus was raised by Amalthea, a divine goat whose milk nourished the infant god. In gratitude, Zeus would later set her image among the stars as the constellation Capricorn, and from one of her horns he fashioned the cornucopia the horn of plenty that could produce endless abundance. Other traditions say that nymphs cared for him, divine spirits of nature who understood the importance of the child they protected. Still others mention the curetes or curetes, young warriors or divine dancers who clashed their shields and spears together, creating noise to mask the crying of the infant Zeus, ensuring that no sound would carry beyond the cave to betray his location to any who might search for him. He grew quickly, as gods do. Where mortal children require years to mature, divine beings can compress growth into much shorter spans, or extend it across centuries, depending on the needs of fate and story. Zeus matured in body and mind, learning wisdom and cunning, developing the strength and the character that would make him fit to rule. And as he grew, he learned the truth about himself, who he was, who his parents were, what had been done to his siblings, why he had been hidden. This knowledge must have shaped him profoundly. Zeus was not raised in the comfort of his father's palace, not educated in the ways of divine rule by those who already held power. He was raised in exile, in hiding, knowing from his earliest awareness that his very existence was a secret that must be guarded, that his father sought to destroy him, that 5 siblings he had never met were imprisoned within their father's body, alive but trapped. He learned that his destiny was not peaceful succession, but violent overthrow, not inheritance but conquest. When Zeus came of age and was ready to begin his campaign against his father, he first needed allies. The other Titans would not automatically support him. Many were Cronus's siblings, and whatever their private feelings about their brother's behavior, they had shared in the rule of the cosmos during the Golden Age, and might see Zeus as a threat to their own positions. He needed unexpected allies, beings powerful enough to turn the tide of battle, but who had their own grievances against the current order. He turned first to Metis, whose name means cunning, or wise counsel, an Oceanid nymph, whose intelligence was renowned even among the gods. Some traditions name her as Zeus's first wife, though this comes later. At this point in the narrative, based on the mythological timeline, she appears to have functioned as his advisor and co-conspirator. Metis prepared a mixture, a drink that was both potion and poison, designed specifically to make Cronus vomit up the children he had swallowed. The ancient sources don't provide the exact recipe, but the logic seems clear. It was a reversal of swallowing, a forcing out of what had been forced in, a kind of cosmic emetic that would work on even a god's divine digestion. Zeus, whether through disguise or stealth or simply through boldness, the myths vary in their accounts and seem more concerned with results than methods, managed to approach his father and convinced him to drink the mixture. Perhaps he presented himself as a cupbearer, a servant bringing refreshment to the king. Perhaps he worked through intermediaries, or used Rhea's assistance, or relied on trickery. What we can say with certainty from Hesiod's account is that Cronus drank, and the result was spectacular and violent. Cronus drank the mixture, and immediately his stomach began to rebel. The god who had swallowed 5 children whole now found those children forcing their way back out. First came the stone, the wrapped rock that Cronus had believed was Zeus, expelled violently as the first sign that something was terribly wrong. Then came the children themselves, in reverse order from how they had entered, Poseidon first, then Hades, then Hera, then Demeter, then finally Hestia, the eldest, last to be swallowed, and therefore first to emerge. They came out fully grown. They had been children when swallowed, but gods do not age in the normal way, and time inside Cronus's body had not stopped, but had continued in its own strange fashion. They emerged as adult deities, fully formed and fully powered, ready to become the gods they were always meant to be. But they also emerged traumatized, enraged, having spent what might have been years or decades or even centuries imprisoned in darkness, aware but helpless, alive but not living. They owed their freedom to this youngest brother they had never met, this Zeus who had rescued them, and they owed their suffering to the father who stood before them, still reeling from the violence of regurgitation, perhaps only now beginning to understand that the prophecy he had tried so hard to avoid had found him anyway. Zeus had his siblings as allies, but he needed more. 6 young gods against all the established power of the Titans would not be enough, no matter how righteous their cause or how powerful they might individually be. He needed to find those who had been wronged by the old order, who had reason to see Cronus and his fellow Titans overthrown. And so Zeus went to Tartarus, that deep pit beneath the earth, where Cronus had imprisoned the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires after briefly freeing them from Gaia's womb. These beings, Cronus's own uncles, had been locked away because Cronus feared their power just as Uranus had before him. They had committed no crime except existing in their strange and mighty forms, and they had languished in imprisonment through the entire Golden Age, a dark secret hidden beneath paradise, a reminder that even perfect peace can be built on injustice and cruelty. Zeus descended into Tartarus and found these ancient beings still imprisoned. He promised them freedom, not temporary but permanent. And more than freedom, he promised them honored positions in the new order he would establish if they would help him overthrow Cronus. The Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires, these strange titans who had suffered so much and received so little justice, agreed immediately. The Cyclopes, those master craftsmen with their single piercing eyes, set to work forging weapons worthy of the battle to come. For Zeus, they created the thunderbolt, a weapon of pure celestial power that cracked the sky when thrown and could strike down anything it touched. For Poseidon, they forged the trident, a 3-pronged spear that could shake the earth and command the seas. For Hades, they crafted a helmet of invisibility, allowing the wearer to move unseen by any being, mortal or divine. The Hecatoncheires, with their 100 hands and 50 heads, offered their own unique form of warfare. Each could hurl 100 rocks simultaneously. Each of their 50 heads could observe battle from a different angle. And their combined strength was such that even the mightiest Titan would struggle against just one of them, let alone all 3 working in coordination. Zeus also found other allies among the younger generation of gods. Themis, the Titaness of divine law, looked at what Cronus had done to his children and recognized injustice that violated even the natural law she embodied. She sided with Zeus, bringing with her the authority of cosmic justice. Prometheus, son of the Titan Iapetus, also chose to support the younger gods. Though his reasons were complex, perhaps he foresaw that Zeus would win Perhaps he genuinely believed the new order would be better than the old. Or perhaps he simply understood that change was necessary and inevitable. Not all Titans would fight for Cronus. Oceanus, the eldest, chose to remain neutral, staying in his position as the river encircling the world, letting the younger generation settle their dispute without his involvement. Some of the Titanesses also declined to participate in the war, viewing it as a conflict between males, a power struggle that did not require their involvement. But many Titans did rally to Cronus, whether out of loyalty, fear, or belief that the old order must be maintained against this upstart rebellion. The lines were drawn. Mount Olympus, that great peak that rose toward the heavens, would be the stronghold of Zeus and his allies, the rebels and revolutionaries who sought to overthrow the established divine order. Mount Othrys, another mighty mountain, became the base of Cronus and the Titans who supported him, the old guard fighting to maintain their rule. The cosmos itself was about to become a battlefield, and the war that followed would be so terrible, so all-consuming, so violent and destructive, that it would shake the foundations of reality itself and last for 10 full years before a victor emerged. The Titanomachy was about to begin, and when it ended, the world of gods and mortals alike would be fundamentally and forever changed. The Titanomachy, 10 years of cosmic war. The war between the Titans and the Olympians, for Zeus and his siblings, would come to be called the Olympian gods after their mountain stronghold, was not a quick conflict resolved in a single battle. It was a grinding, devastating, decade-long series of conflicts that ranged across the cosmos, destroying landscapes, boiling seas, and cracking the very sky itself. The ancient sources call it the Titanomachy, the Battle of the Titans, and it represents one of the most important transitional moments in all Greek mythology, the violent passing of power from one generation of gods to the next. The geography of the conflict tells us much about its nature. Mount Olympus, where Zeus and his allies had established their base, was the highest mountain in Greece. Its peak often wreathed in clouds, its heights inaccessible to mortals. It symbolized aspiration, reaching toward the heavens, the desire of the younger generation to rise above their parents and claim the sky itself. Mount Othrys, by contrast, was older and more established, a place where the Titans had long held court during the Golden Age. The conflict between these two mountains, these two headquarters, represented not just a military campaign, but a fundamental philosophical disagreement about power, justice, and the proper order of the cosmos. The combatants divided along complex lines. Cronus commanded one side, supported by many of his fellow Titans. The male Titans who fought for him included Hyperion, god of light, whose presence brought day and night into service as weapons of war. Iapetus, who commanded his sons except for Prometheus, who had defected. Creus, who marshaled the cosmic forces associated with constellation and measure, and Coeus, who controlled the axis of heaven itself. These were primordial powers, beings who had held dominion over fundamental aspects of reality since the cosmos was young. Their experience, their knowledge of how the universe functioned, their mastery over the elements they controlled, all of this should have made them invincible. Atlas, son of Iapetus, served as the leader of the Titan forces, second in command to Cronus himself. Atlas was renowned for his strength and his strategic mind, and he directed the Titan armies with skill and determination, pushing the battle to its limits, making Zeus and his siblings fight for every inch of ground they gained. On the Olympian side stood Zeus, wielding thunderbolts that lit up the battlefield like miniature suns. Poseidon, who commanded the seas and could shake the earth with strikes of his trident. Hades, who wore his helm of darkness and struck from unexpected angles, invisible and terrifying. Hera, whose power over the bonds of loyalty and family gave her control over oaths and alliances. Demeter, who could withhold or grant fertility to the earth itself, potentially starving an enemy into submission. And Hestia, whose control over fire and hearth meant she could deny warmth and domestic peace to those she opposed. Supporting them were the Cyclopes, who continued to forge weapons and repair damage to the Olympians' arms and armor. The Hecatoncheires, whose ability to throw hundreds of rocks simultaneously made them like living artillery. And several Titans and Titanesses who had sided with the new order. Themis brought the weight of cosmic law to Zeus's cause, making it clear that this was not mere rebellion, but justified revolution. Prometheus brought his foresight and cunning, advising Zeus on strategy and helping to predict Cronus's movements. Oceanus, while officially neutral, tacitly supported Zeus by not blocking his access to water sources or using his encircling river as a weapon against the Olympians. For 10 years they fought. A decade is a long time even for immortal beings, and the duration of the conflict suggests how evenly matched the two sides were. Neither could gain decisive advantage. The Titans had experience and mastery over fundamental cosmic forces, but the Olympians had superior weapons forged by the Cyclopes. The overwhelming physical might of the Hecatoncheires and the righteousness of their cause. They were fighting against tyranny, against a father who had literally tried to devour his own children. The battles themselves must have been spectacular and terrible. Imagine Zeus hurling thunderbolts that cracked the sky, each strike illuminating the battlefield in brilliant white light before plunging it back into darkness. Imagine Poseidon raising tidal waves higher than mountains, drowning valleys, and reshaping coastlines with casual strokes of his trident. Imagine the earth itself, shaking and splitting as the gods clashed, mountains rising and falling, rivers changing course, whole regions of the world remade in moments as the children of earth and sky waged war with forces that could unmake creation. Hyperion would have brought the full force of solar heat to bear against the Olympians, trying to burn them from the field, while Zeus countered with storms that darkened the sun and brought torrential rain. Iapetus commanded his loyal sons, sending them against Zeus's forces in coordinated strikes designed to exploit weaknesses in the Olympian formation. The Hecatoncheires answered by creating literal walls of stone, each of their 100 arms hurling rocks in coordinated barrages that no shield could fully block, that overwhelmed defenses through pure volume of projectiles. The fighting was so fierce that it could be heard even in the depths of Tartarus, far below the battlefields. The myth tells us that the sound of combat reached all the way down to the lowest pit of the underworld, where even the darkness trembled at the fury above. The sea boiled from the heat of battle. Mountains were shattered, and reformed. Rivers ran backward or disappeared entirely, their waters vaporized by divine power, or redirected by gods who could reshape terrain as easily as mortals could plow a field. Through it all, Cronus fought with the desperation of a king who knew that defeat meant not just losing power, but validating the prophecy he had tried so hard to avoid. He had swallowed his children to prevent this moment, had committed unspeakable acts, had transformed himself from the king of the Golden Age into a tyrant driven by fear. Now those very children stood against him, righteous in their anger, terrible in their power, and he could see in their eyes the same determination he himself had shown when he castrated Uranus. The cycle was completing, and he was powerless to stop it despite all his might. The turning point came through the intervention of the Hyperions. These three brothers, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, who had suffered so long in imprisonment, who had been freed by Zeus specifically to serve in this war, now proved their worth beyond anything the Olympians could have hoped. The myth describes them taking up 300 rocks at a time, 100 rocks per brother, and hurling them simultaneously at the Titan forces. The bombardment was overwhelming. No matter how powerful the Titans were, no matter how skilled in combat or how experienced in using their divine abilities, they could not withstand this assault. Rocks rained down upon Mount Othrys like a lethal hailstorm, battering defenses, crushing positions, driving the Titans back and back and back until they had nowhere left to retreat. The Hyperions, these strange beings who had been judged too monstrous to see the light of day, proved to be the decisive factor in saving the cosmos from tyranny. The final confrontation between Zeus and Cronus is not described in detail in the surviving sources, but we can imagine it. Father and son, the king of the Titans and the young god who would replace him, facing each other across a battlefield littered with debris and echoing with the cries of combatants. Perhaps they spoke before striking, exchanging words about prophecy and destiny and the terrible things fathers and sons can do to one another. Perhaps they simply attacked, too far gone in rage and fear and determination to waste breath on conversation. Zeus's thunderbolts must have illuminated that final confrontation, turning night to day with each strike. Cronus would have fought with all the power that had made him king, all the strength that had allowed him to castrate Uranus and rule for an age. But prophecy is inexorable, and fate had long ago decided the outcome of this battle. Zeus, the youngest son, the one who should never have been born, the child saved by his mother's love and his grandmother's cunning, struck his father down. The Titans were defeated. One by one they were overpowered, captured, bound. The Hyperions, who had proven such devastating allies, now became jailers, appointed by Zeus to guard the captured Titans and ensure they could never threaten the new order. And the prison to which the Titans were consigned was Tartarus, that deep and terrible pit beneath the earth, as far below the surface as the sky is above it, a place of darkness and of Frenang, an eternal confinement. The irony was perfect and terrible. Cronus, who had imprisoned his uncles the Cyclopes and Hyperions in Tartarus, who had maintained that prison throughout his reign, now found himself confined in the same place, guarded by those very beings he had imprisoned. The castrator of Uranus was now overthrown by his own son, just as prophecy had declared. The swallower of children was defeated by the one child who escaped his maw. The king of the Golden Age ended his reign, not in glory, but in chains, locked away in darkness, his paradise forfeited, his power stripped away, his fate a mirror of the fate he had inflicted on others. Atlas, who had led the Titan forces in battle, received a unique and terrible punishment. Zeus condemned him to hold up the sky itself, to stand at the western edge of the world, bearing the weight of the heavens on his shoulders for all eternity. It was a punishment that matched the crime. Atlas had led armies that tried to pull down the new order of the sky, and so now he would hold that sky up forever. A cosmic prisoner whose punishment was also a necessity. For if Atlas ever set down his burden, sky and earth might crash together and undo creation itself. The war was over. 10 years of combat had ended with the Olympians victorious and the Titans defeated. The Golden Age was finished, never to return in its perfect form. A new age was beginning, an age of a new dynasty of gods. An age when Zeus and his siblings would rule from Mount Olympus, establishing the divine order that would persist through the rest of Greek mythology and into the modern imagination. But the story of the Titans was not entirely over, for though they were defeated and imprisoned, their influence would continue. Their children would shape the new world order, and their memory would persist as a reminder of what came before, of the first rulers of the cosmos, of the age when gods walked the earth and humanity knew paradise. The aftermath: victory, punishment, and new order. With the Titans defeated and locked away in Tartarus, Zeus and his siblings faced the task of reorganizing the cosmos, of deciding how power would be distributed in this new age, of establishing the divine order that would govern all things going forward. The old system, in which Cronus and the Titans had divided responsibilities among themselves, had been overthrown. Now the victors had to create something new. The first and most important decision was the division of the cosmos itself. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, decided to settle the matter by drawing lots, a method that left the decision to fate rather than to their own preferences or to conflict among themselves. They divided the universe into 3 great domains, and each brother drew for his portion. Zeus drew the sky and the heavens, becoming lord of the upper air, master of weather and storm, king of the clear, bright atmosphere where birds fly and clouds gather. This domain came with supreme authority, for the sky was considered the highest realm, and Zeus, as sky god, would be king of gods and men, the ultimate authority to which all others would defer. His thunderbolt, forged by the Cyclopes, became the symbol of his power, the weapon that could enforce his will against any who challenged his rule. Poseidon drew the seas, all the waters of the earth, fresh and salt, rivers and oceans, and the mysterious depths where strange creatures dwelt in eternal darkness. His trident gave him power over water in all its forms, allowed him to raise waves or calm storms, to shake the earth itself, since the ancient Greeks believed earthquakes were connected to underground water. He would be second only to Zeus in power, a mighty god in his own right. and his realm was vast and rich. For the seas covered much of the world and held mysteries that even other gods rarely penetrated. Hades drew the underworld, the realm of the dead, the dark kingdom beneath the earth, where all mortal souls eventually came, regardless of virtue or vice, hero or coward. In ancient Greek thought, this was not exactly a punishment for Hades. The underworld was not hell in the Christian sense, and ruling there was a position of great power and importance, though it was admittedly less pleasant than ruling the sky or the seas. Hades would be lord of the dead, keeper of the gates that none could pass in reverse, guardian of tremendous wealth, since all the precious metals and gems lay buried in his kingdom. But he would also be isolated, cut off from the bright world above, rarely welcome on Olympus, associated with death and endings rather than life and beginnings. The earth itself and Mount Olympus would be common ground, shared by all the gods, places where they could meet and interact, where temples could be built and sacrifices offered, where divine and mortal could still have contact with one another. This arrangement, decided by chance, would persist through all of Greek mythology, defining the structure of divine power and the relationships among the major gods. But what of the Titans? Most remained imprisoned in Tartarus, confined there for eternity, as far as the initial ruling went. The Hecaton Cheras stood guard, their 100 hands and 50 heads ensuring that no prisoner could escape, that the old generation of gods would not rise again to threaten the new order. Bronze gates sealed the entrance, and walls of bronze surrounded the prison, making it virtually impossible to break out or to break in. There the Titans remained, in the deepest darkness, as far below the earth as the sky was above it, suffering not physical torment, but the psychological agony of eternal confinement and the knowledge that their age had ended, that they had been replaced, that the cosmos had moved on without them. Yet not all Titans suffered this fate. Those who had sided with Zeus during the Titanomachy, or who had remained neutral, were allowed to keep their positions and their powers. Themis, who had brought divine law to Zeus's side, became one of his consorts and advisors, highly honored for her wisdom and her role in establishing the justice that would characterize the new divine order. She would eventually bear Zeus children, including the Horae, hours or seasons, and the Moirai, fates, goddesses who would help structure time and destiny themselves. Mnemosyne, the titaness of memory, also became a consort of Zeus, and from their union came the 9 muses, those goddesses who would inspire all artistic endeavor, all poetry and music, and dance and learning. Through the muses, Mnemosyne ensured that memory would be preserved, that nothing important would be forgotten, that human achievement and divine glory would be celebrated and passed down through generations. Oceanus continued in his role as the great river encircling the world, his neutrality in the war having protected his position. His waters still flowed at the edges of the cosmos, still served as boundary between the known world and the mysterious lands beyond. His children, the river gods and oceanid nymphs, continued to preside over waters throughout the world, integrated into the new divine order without disruption. Hyperion's children, Helios the sun, Selene the moon, and Eos the dawn, continued their celestial functions, driving their chariots across the sky, bringing light and marking time. These second-generation Titans became important figures in the Olympian age, often called upon and worshipped by mortals who depended on their regular movements to structure agricultural cycles and daily activities. Prometheus, who had sided with Zeus, received permission to walk free, at least initially. He was given the task of creating humanity in some traditions. Other myths attribute human creation to different sources, and serving as a benefactor to mortals, teaching them skills and crafts, helping them survive in a world that was no longer the paradise of the Golden Age. But Prometheus's relationship with Zeus would eventually sour, leading to his own punishment. For the Titan had a habit of caring more about humans than about Zeus's authority. And that tension would eventually result in the famous story of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and being chained to a rock for his transgression. Atlas, as mentioned, received unique punishment, condemned to hold up the sky. His crime had been his leadership of the Titan forces, his role as the primary general who had made the war last as long as it did, who had nearly brought victory to Cronus despite the prophecy and despite the justice of Zeus's cause. He would stand at the western edge of the world, traditionally placed in the Atlas Mountains of northwest Africa, bearing his burden for eternity, a reminder to all of what happened to those who opposed Zeus, but also a necessary guardian whose punishment served cosmic function. Someone had to hold the sky up, and who better than the strongest of the Titans? The female Titans generally fared better than the males, perhaps because they had largely stayed out of the fighting, perhaps because Zeus recognized their importance to cosmic functions that transcended political allegiance. Rhea, mother of the Olympians, was honored as the great mother goddess, her role in saving Zeus acknowledged and celebrated. She remained on Olympus, revered by her children, serving as a steadying presence in the often chaotic new divine order. The war had established Zeus as supreme, but it had also revealed the cost of that supremacy. The Titanomachy had been necessary to overthrow tyranny, to rescue the swallowed children, to fulfill prophecy, and establish justice. But it had also been destructive, violent, and traumatic. The cosmos itself had been damaged, reshaped by divine combat, made less perfect than it had been during the Golden Age. The seamless peace of Cronus's reign, built though it was on injustice and fear, had given way to a more complex order, one where justice and power existed in tension, where the gods themselves were flawed, and their rule was maintained through strength as much as wisdom. Zeus and his siblings would go on to have many adventures, to interfere in human affairs, to produce children both mortal and immortal, to wage smaller wars and navigate complex politics. The age of the Olympians would be one of great glory and great folly, of heroes and monsters, of love and betrayal, of divine intervention in human life to a degree that the distant Titans had never practiced. The myths we know best, the stories of Heracles and Perseus, of the Trojan War and the Odyssey, all take place in this new age, under the rule of Zeus and his fellow Olympians. But underneath it all, at the foundation of every story, lay the memory of what came before. The age of the Titans, the golden age of humanity, the rule of Cronus, and the violent overthrow that ended that age and began the world as the Greeks knew it. The Titans had been defeated, but they had not been erased. They remained locked away in Tartarus or transformed into stars, their children and grandchildren shaping the new order. Their legacy impossible to escape, even for the gods who had replaced them. The cosmos had moved from one age to another, but the cycle of violence that began with the castration of Uranus and continued through Cronus's swallowing of his children and climaxed in the Titanomachy was not broken, but merely paused. Zeus himself would face challenges to his rule, would have to be wary of prophecies suggesting his own potential overthrow, would make decisions based on paranoia not so different from what had driven Cronus to his terrible acts. The pattern, once established, proved difficult to break, and the Titan's story served as a constant reminder. Power is never permanent. Every ruler eventually falls, and children inevitably replace their parents, whether through natural succession or violent revolution. Legacy and influence. The Titans in later mythology and culture. The defeat of the Titans did not mean their disappearance from Greek religious or cultural life. They remained powerful figures in the Greek imagination, representing not only the mythological past, but also deep truths about cosmic order, the passage of time, and the relationship between generations. Their story was not simply a tale told for entertainment, but a framework through which ancient Greeks understood their world and their place in it. Despite their overthrow and imprisonment, several Titans continued to receive worship and honor from the Greeks. Cronus in particular maintained a cult following, and his name was associated with agricultural festivals that celebrated the harvest. In Athens, the festival called Cronia was held each summer in honor of Cronus, and it had a distinctive character. During the celebration, social hierarchies were temporarily inverted. Masters and slaves dined together as equals, echoing the egalitarian nature of the Golden Age, when humanity lived without class distinction or social stratification. This reversal of normal order was seen as a return, however brief, to the paradise that had existed under Cronus's rule before the Olympian age brought with it divisions and hierarchies that made life more complex and less blessed. The Cronia festival reveals something important about how the Greeks viewed the Titans. They were not simple villains whose defeat was unambiguously good. They represented a lost golden time, and their overthrow, however necessary or just it might have been, came at a cost. The world under Zeus was more dynamic, more interesting, more filled with heroes and adventures and divine drama. But it was also less perfect, less innocent, less like paradise than the world under Cronus had been. There was genuine nostalgia in Greek culture for the Titan age, a sense that something precious had been lost when they fell. This nostalgia would continue in Roman culture when the Greeks' cultural dominance led to the Roman adoption and adaptation of Greek mythology. The Romans identified Cronus with their own god Saturn, and the festival of Saturnalia became one of the most important celebrations in the Roman calendar. Saturnalia, held in late December, was a time of feasting, gift-giving, reversal of social norms, and general merriment. It lasted for several days and was so significant in Roman culture that many of its elements would eventually be absorbed into Christian Christmas celebrations. When Romans gave gifts, decorated their homes with greenery, and celebrated during the darkest part of winter, they were participating in traditions that traced back through Saturn to Cronus, to the Titan king and his golden age. The story of the Titans also served educational and philosophical functions in Greek and Roman thought. Philosophers used the succession myth, the pattern of Uranus overthrown by Cronus, overthrown by Zeus, as a way to discuss political power, succession crises, and the natural tensions between old and new orders. Plato, in his dialogue, The Statesman, draws on the myth of Cronus's golden age to discuss the nature of ideal governance, suggesting that the peace of that time existed because gods, rather than humans, ruled, and that human government is inevitably more flawed and troubled because we lack the divine wisdom and perspective that made the Golden Age possible. The Titans also served as cautionary figures. The pattern of violent overthrow, of children rising against parents, of prophecies that could not be avoided no matter what attempts were made to thwart them. All of this suggested to the Greeks that certain patterns were built into the structure of reality itself, that attempting to hold on to power beyond its natural time would result in loss of that power through increasingly violent means. Better to accept natural succession. Better to work with fate than against it. Better to treat one's children with justice than to invite the kind of rebellion that the Titan story demonstrated was always possible. Modern scholarship has revealed that the Titan myth did not originate entirely within Greece, but drew on older Near Eastern traditions. The castration of Uranus by Cronus parallels the Hittite kingship in heaven myth, in which the sky god Anu is castrated by Kumarbi, who then rules until being overthrown by the storm god Teshub. The broad pattern of generational conflict among gods, of sky deities being overthrown by their children, of violence establishing each new divine dynasty, appears in multiple ancient Near Eastern cultures, suggesting that the Greeks borrowed and adapted these stories, making them their own, but working within a broader mythological tradition that spanned the ancient Mediterranean world. This Near Eastern influence reminds us that Greek mythology was not created in isolation, but was part of a larger cultural conversation, absorbing stories and themes from neighboring civilizations and transforming them through distinctively Greek perspectives and values. The Titans, while thoroughly Greek in their final form, carry within their story echoes of older myths, links to Mesopotamian and Anatolian traditions, connections that tie Greek culture to the broader ancient world. The individual Titans also left their marks on later culture in ways both direct and subtle. Atlas, holding up the sky, became a symbol of endurance under terrible burden, of strength maintaining cosmic order, of punishment that serves a necessary function. His name was given to the Atlas Mountains and eventually to books of maps, atlases, because maps often featured images of Atlas bearing the celestial sphere, suggesting that the book too bore the weight of representing the entire world. Prometheus, though his full story extends beyond the Titanomachy, became one of the most enduring and significant figures from Titan mythology, representing the benefactor who suffers for humanity's sake, who brings light, both literal fire and metaphorical enlightenment, to mortals even at great personal cost. His theft of fire from the gods and his subsequent punishment, being chained to a rock where an eagle devoured his regenerating liver daily, made him a symbol of rebellion, of the cost of knowledge, and of the conflict between divine authority and human advancement. Modern works from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus, to countless other retellings, continue to invoke Promethean themes of creation, knowledge, and the price of progress. Mnemosyne, through her daughters the Muses, shaped all of Greek artistic and intellectual culture. When poets invoked the Muses at the beginning of their works, they were ultimately calling on the power of the Titaness of memory, asking for her gift of remembrance and inspiration, requesting that she help them recall and properly tell the stories that needed to be told. Without Mnemosyne, there would be no poetry, no history, no preservation of the past, and her continued importance in Greek culture showed that the Titans' influence persisted even in the age that had overthrown them. In modern times, the Titans continue to appear in popular culture, from Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series, which reimagines Greek mythology for young adult readers, to films, video games, and comic books that draw on their imagery and stories. They represent, in contemporary imagination, a kind of primordial power, older and in some ways more elemental than the Olympian gods who replaced them. When modern storytellers want to evoke truly ancient forces, beings who existed before the current order of things, they often turn to the Titans as symbols of that deep mythological past. The very word Titanic has entered English as a descriptor for anything of enormous size, power, or significance. We speak of titanic struggles, titanic achievements, titanic forces, always invoking the sense of something vast and primordial, something that echoes those first divine rulers who were themselves so mighty that it took a cosmic war to overthrow them. Closing, the eternal return of ancient patterns and the secret at the heart of power. As you lie in the darkness, in the quiet hours when the day's concerns have faded and the mind begins its gentle drift towards sleep, let yourself rest in the knowledge that the story of the Titans is not simply an ancient tale from a dead culture, but a living pattern that continues to resonate through human experience. But before you sleep, there is one more revelation to consider, one final piece of the puzzle that recontextualizes everything we've explored tonight. When we examine the ancient sources carefully, Homer, Hesiod, Pindar, Aeschylus, we discover something fascinating. None of them explicitly state that Atlas was punished for his role in the Titanomachy. They all mention Atlas bearing the heavens on his shoulders, but the connection to the war as punishment appears only in much later Roman sources, particularly Hyginus' writing, centuries after the original Greek texts. This detail matters more than it might first appear. It opens a provocative possibility that changes how we interpret the entire myth. What if Atlas wasn't being punished at all? What if his role holding up the sky had always been his cosmic function, his purpose in the divine order from the very beginning? Consider the cosmology. The ancient Greeks conceived of the sky as a solid dome that required physical support. Some traditions spoke of 4 pillars at the corners of the world, held by 4 brothers, Hyperion, Coeus, Creus, and Iapetus. In this framework, it stands to reason that Atlas, renowned as the strongest of all the Titans, might have been the central pillar, the primary support, long before any war was ever waged. If this interpretation is correct, and the evidence from the earliest sources suggests it could be, then what we've been calling Atlas's punishment becomes something else entirely. Not a penalty imposed by Zeus for rebellion, but a cosmic necessity that Zeus recognized and maintained. The sky needed to be held up, regardless of which generation of gods ruled Olympus. Without Atlas at his post, heaven and earth would crash together and undo all of creation. Zeus didn't create this burden, he simply ensured it continued. And this realization transforms our entire understanding of the Titans' defeat. They weren't all destroyed or even truly imprisoned in the conventional sense. They were integrated into a new order that still required their fundamental functions. Oceanus continued to encircle the world because the cosmos needed those boundaries. Hyperion's children, Helios, Selene, and Eos, continued driving the sun, moon, and dawn across the sky because time itself depended on their eternal journeys. The Titanesses, who embodied memory, natural law, and divine order, continued their roles because these principles transcend any particular regime, any political dynasty, any generation's claim to power. Even Cronus, locked away in Tartarus, might represent not simple punishment, but the removal from power of a principle that had served its purpose, his essential function, whatever cosmic force he truly embodied, finding new expression through his children in the age of Zeus. This is the secret at the heart of power that the myth reveals. True cosmic order is not about who rules, but about which functions continue. The Olympians didn't destroy the Titans. They displaced them politically while maintaining the essential structure of reality. Zeus's victory wasn't total domination, but rather a changing of the guard, while the universe's fundamental operations continued uninterrupted. And perhaps this is why the Greeks could look back on the Titan age with such nostalgia. Why Cronus could be honored at festivals even after his defeat. Why the Golden Age under the Titans remained an ideal that later ages longed to recapture. The Titans weren't evil beings who deserved destruction. They were the first attempt at cosmic order. And though their political rule ended, their essential contributions to reality endured. The cycle of generations, each overthrowing the last, each establishing a new order only to face challenges in turn, speaks to something fundamental, not just about political power, but about the nature of time and change itself. Children do eventually replace parents. New ideas do supplant old ones. Established orders do give way to revolution, whether violent or peaceful. But beneath this surface turbulence, deeper patterns persist. The sun still rises, memory still functions, justice still matters, the sky still requires support. The Titan story reminds us that this process is as old as consciousness itself, as inevitable as time, and that resistance to natural succession often brings about exactly what we fear. Just as Cronus's attempt to avoid prophecy ensured that prophecy would be fulfilled in the most dramatic way possible. The Golden Age under Cronus represents every civilization's dream of a better past, a perfect time when life was easier and humanity was happier. Every culture has its own version of this myth, its own golden age that has been lost. The Greeks' golden age under the Titans is both unique to their culture and universal in its appeal, capturing a longing that transcends any particular time or place. Yet the story also contains its warning. Paradise built on injustice cannot last, no matter how beautiful the surface appears. Cronus's golden age was genuine. Humanity really did live better under his rule. But it was established through violence and maintained through paranoia. Peace purchased through cruelty, prosperity built on fear, cannot endure. Eventually, the hidden violence at the foundation will surface and tear down what has been built. The Titans teach us about the price of power, the cost of succession, the inevitability of change, and the patterns that repeat through generations. They remind us that even gods can be overthrown, that no reign lasts forever, that prophecy and fate have their way, regardless of how much power one possesses. But they also remind us of something deeper. Beneath the drama of succession and the violence of overthrow, there exist fundamental structures that persist. The cosmological functions continue. The essential operations of reality endure, and in this persistence lies a kind of immortality, more profound than any individual reign. The Titans were defeated politically, but they were not destroyed cosmologically. They remain in Tartarus, yes, but also in the dawn that breaks each morning, in the memory that preserves our experiences, in the laws that govern behavior, in the very structure of reality itself. They are the foundation that cannot be removed without destroying everything built upon it. As you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself standing at the edge of time, watching Atlas at his eternal post. He is not a prisoner suffering under imposed punishment, but a pillar maintaining the separation between heaven and earth, performing the function he has always performed, will always perform, must always perform for reality to continue. His burden is not penalty, but purpose. His endurance is not submission, but service. See the Titans not as villains, defeated and justly punished, but as the primordial order giving way to the classical order, making room for the new while ensuring the essential continues. Watch the cycle turn, one age giving way to the next, and recognize that beneath this turning, something permanent remains. The Titans sleep in Tartarus. Humanity dreams of the Golden Age. Atlas stands at the world's edge, holding up the sky not in defeat, but in eternal function. And the cosmos continues its eternal operations, the old order yielding to the new in rulership, while maintaining its role in reality, the pattern repeating, the cycle continuing, the stories never truly ending but simply being retold again and again, through all the ages that have been and all the ages yet to come. Rest now. The Titans have told their story, and in doing so, revealed that defeat and victory, punishment and purpose, ending and continuing, are more complex than they first appear. The myths endure because they speak to these complexities, these paradoxes, these deeper truths about how power works and how reality persists beneath the surface drama of succession. Sleep well, knowing that you have journeyed not just through a story of gods and battles, but through a meditation on the nature of power itself, how it changes hands, but how certain functions must continue, how regimes fall, but how the cosmos endures, how the Titans were overthrown, but how their work still sustains the universe in which we live. The world is young and old at once. The stories are ancient and new at once. And you, having heard the tale of the Titans and learned the secret of their true legacy, can release the day's concerns and drift into peaceful sleep, cradled by forces more ancient than any dynasty, more enduring than any ruler, more fundamental than any age. Good night. Thank you for journeying back to the age of the Titans with Sleepable Mythology. If you enjoyed this exploration of the gods before the gods, please subscribe and let us know in the comments which myth you'd like us to explore next. Rest well, knowing that these ancient stories continue to echo through time, connecting us to the eternal patterns that shape all existence. Sweet dreams.